Hey everybody, Tim Bratz from the Legacy Wealth Show. Appreciate you guys being here and pumped up for my guests today, Paul and Adam Vincent from Vincent Esquires. They are attorneys, friends of mine. I've known these guys for a while now, and they're estate attorneys. They do a lot of business stuff, but today I want to talk specifically about estate planning. This is the Legacy Wealth Show, right? So part of creating legacy wealth is the legacy part and passing it along the right way to limit your taxes, to limit your liabilities, to reduce any ongoing risks. And as you grow your portfolio, how do you minimize some of those risks and ongoing liabilities? So appreciate you guys being here. Welcome.
Of course, man. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah,
sounds good.
Awesome. So why don't you guys tell a little bit about you guys, your background, your backstory, how you got into doing more of the probate kind of stuff. And I know we've been working together on my probate stuff personally. So I'd love to walk everybody through what that process looks like, both from a personal perspective. There's a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners who watch the show. So from a business perspective, what are those things you got to have in place to make sure that your family is taken care of if, God forbid, anything happens to us?
Yeah, so we started up our own law firm based on acquiring some real estate client that bought a bunch of tax liens. So that was kind of how we opened our doors, kind of a more complex real estate mechanism to make some money. So we had that client plugging along. And then with that too, we were getting contacted a lot by folks who either own a business in real estate or otherwise just a different kind of service provider. And no one really seemed to know what they're going to do with their stuff, if something were to happen to them. And kind of our own anecdotal story on where's my stuff go was our older brother. He was another best friend of ours. He passed away at 34 or so, and he didn't have any of this stuff. And he had two bozo lawyer brothers. So one of the things we've kind of charged ourselves with in being lawyers and opening up our own shop is helping people get that stuff done. So that's kind of a little bit about us. What else? Anything else?
No, that's about it. Yeah, just helping people get that knocked out, getting the succession planning going.
Yeah.
Either working with what's in place already, they might have to adjust accordingly because usually they don't come to you before the business exists and documents that way.
No one ever does that.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and everybody thinks we're invincible, right? And we're going to live forever and we can always put this stuff off and things can happen. And then I get hit in the mouth with a golf ball from 20 yards away and blows out my teeth and shatters my upper mandible, right? And as I'm going through this, I'm like, holy cow, what if it hit right here in my temple or in my eye? What if I'd be disabled? What if I was killed, when this all went down? And thank God, before I went to Spain earlier this year, you guys sat down with me and we got everything ironed out. But there's still a lot more that I need to organize before my time comes, I feel,
And you felt like Europe was dangerous, let alone Northeast Ohio golf courses.
Right.
I know, right?
Yeah. So that's, those are kind of the early stage considerations on what you want to do. And then, we had talked a little bit about, we don't want to go into too complex, boring legal stuff. But one of the very early things is if you are going to own a business, obviously liability wise, you want to make sure you have a legal entity that's the owner of the business and not you personally. So that, that's kind of an asset protection deal.
So let's start out from a personal standpoint first, and then let's go into the business side of things and how you can reduce your liability and all those things on the business side. So from a personal standpoint, maybe I'm a business owner, maybe I'm a W-2 employee, maybe I own some rental real estate, whatever. What is the process? What are the documents you want to make sure that somebody has in place, and why are those documents important?
Really tell them what the big four.
Yeah, so the four we recommend to anybody across the board, whether you're a business owner or an employee or a stay-at-home parent, are a will. Most people are familiar with a will. Two healthcare documents, the healthcare power of attorney and the living will, and then a durable power of attorney, also known as a financial power of attorney. And the will, most people have heard of, that's a document where you direct where you want your stuff to go after you pass away. And that comes into play when it's not being transferred through some other means, some non-probate transfer. So we'll clarify that. Then the healthcare power of attorney, you appoint an agent who can help make decisions when you're not able to yourself. Living will is about end-of-life decisions. So if you get into a terminal condition, they define it, it's no fun. But that's what that one establishes. But it's no fun to not have it in place either. So you put your wishes on paper. So should it ever come to that?
Okay. So what happens if I don't have a will? What happens to my estate? What happens to all my property? What happens to any money, my bank accounts? What happens to all that stuff if I don't have a will in place?
Yeah, so states thankfully have thought of that problem because it's been happening forever. So there's actually a statute that controls, and it's a pretty typical statute where if you're married, it's all going to go to your spouse, and then if you're not married, then it'll have this kind of dissension on where it goes. Like if you don't have any children, then it'll go to your parents. But if your parents aren't there, it'll go to your siblings. So it just kind of depends. But there's actually a statute to control that, and it's based on kind of a traditional transfer of property. So not the problem with
What does
that
that process look like if you don't have a will?
Yeah, so if you don't have it, then you got to find someone that's willing to file on your behalf as administrator for your estate in a probate court. You do a bunch of filings. Usually it's a lawyer or some sort of relative or friend that wants to do it, but usually lawyers. It takes a long period of time. It takes a good chunk of money up front, and it's just kind of in a situation where somebody passes away, the last thing you want to do is deal with boring legal documents or like, what the hell do I do with this bank account? Or I don't even know how many bank accounts they have. I don't know if they have insurance. I don't know how to pay for this funeral. And there's a lot of very immediate things to consider. So if you don't have that stuff, it's just, unfortunately another difficult piece for your family and friends to deal with on your behalf.
Right. Complex. You don't know where it's going, who's going to be appointed, if they're going to do the right thing, a lot of different stuff like that. So the will itself outlines who gets what from your estate when you pass away. It outlines who's supposed to direct your estate, right? Who says, hey, this is where it's going and to whom and all that kind of stuff. And it expedites that whole process. So it's not all there, right? Or it's not all convoluted. Healthcare power of attorney. So tell me what happens if you don't have a healthcare power of attorney.
So you're going to have a hard time with somebody acting on your behalf to help you make healthcare decisions. So if you bonk your head and you have nobody as backup and you're an adult, there's really nobody that can speak on your behalf to help decide whether you should have surgery, whether you should not have surgery, and kind of your own care. So that's the big benefit of that, is you can have a tag team partner help decide whether it be your parent or your spouse or your friend or whoever it might be. But that's basically it. Someone stepping in your shoes in the doctor's office that can speak on your behalf.
Got it.
And what happens is it puts the medical folks in a tough spot because they don't necessarily know what to do because you don't have someone there. Same thing with a living will. If you're in a terminal condition, there have been some big cases in the news over the last 5 or 10 years where people didn't have it in place. They've started treatment. The hospital started treatment on this person, basically keeping them alive with a machine. And then what happens? And one side says no, one side says yes, and the hospital's in the middle. So if you put that on paper, what your wishes are, then there aren't any questions.
Yeah, it cuts out confusion.
So healthcare power of attorney and living will. Give me the difference between the two. Living will is more of if you're completely incapacitated.
Right. Yeah. Living will is your last declaration on how you want to be treated when you're in a terminal state. So, if you're on,
if you're totally brain dead and you're not coming back,
Yeah, it basically says either my designee or two doctors can say, hey, this person is not going to come back from where they are right now. So, withdraw care.
In Ohio, there's a standard. They define it a specific way, and they've said, yeah, your doctor and one other doctor have said, yes, this person is in a terminal state, and that's when this document comes into play.
And they're still like your spouse or whoever you designate also needs to say that, right?
Well, it depends. You can actually ask for that or not. The one thing with a living will that's somewhat helpful, well, I think very helpful, is that it takes that decision away from your spouse, so they don't have to be like feeling, obviously guilty forever.
I killed my husband. I killed my wife, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, for me, from my own personal point of view.
Good one last joke, though, kind of thing.
So that's right. So you just take it out of their, decision making and just leave it up to you.
Yeah.
But some people do want their spouse to confirm, so that's something you can do.
And the document can create some flexibility. It can talk about time frames or involve this person or require the spouse to check off or whatever. So yeah, it allows for that.
Right. Yep.
And healthcare power of attorney. So the way that's different is if you get hurt or maybe you're like dependent upon drugs or you have a mental condition and you think you can make a decision, but you really can't make a decision. Is that more healthcare power of attorney?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you can have that person that's.
Or you're temporarily disabled and in a coma state, but you still have brain.
Let's say when you got bonked in the mouth, right? I mean, maybe part of your religion is you don't use medication, or maybe maybe it's not a religion, but just what you don't believe in, like pain medication or something like that. You could have somebody come in and speak on your behalf and say, hey, no, he doesn't believe in X, Y, Z, and they can make those decisions on your behalf. Because obviously, a period of time, if you get bonked hard enough, you can't speak on your own behalf. So
yeah. Well, how about durable power of attorney?
So yeah, that's just financial. It's similar to healthcare. It's just someone that can step in your shoes and act on your behalf. They can conduct business on your behalf. They can open accounts, close accounts, sign legal documents. It's as broad or as narrow as you want. We deal with a lot of short-term power of attorneys for people like, you're traveling out of country. Let's say, you're in Spain and you need to transact some real estate purchase. You could actually designate somebody just for like 48 hours to sign stuff on your behalf. So
and I did that. And how about, and so this is both while you're living and after, right?
Yeah, that ends when you pass away.
Yeah, no. So yeah, it ends with the person. So
okay. So this person couldn't go out and close bank accounts and all that kind of stuff. That would then be designated from the will.
Right. Yep. That would have to, depending how that is, and we can talk about non-probate stuff, very simple ways to transfer that property. But yeah, that power of attorney would end with your life, and then that would, if there wasn't other documents, that would have to be wrapped into a probate court and get taken care of there.
Yeah. How much is probate court, and what's the cost associated with going through all that stuff if you don't have a will versus if you have a will? Is there a difference?
Perhaps. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the lawyers you're dealing with. But if you have assets, a lot of those assets in their sale is what's going to pay for the legal fees. So, I mean, I don't have any kind of measure on what the difference in cost would be, but I don't think it would be a ton different if you didn't have it.
County by county in Ohio, it's a filing fee for it that depends on the county.
Right. And those filing fees will be the same if you have a will or don't.
Right.
So. How about if I don't want my kid, like you can be as direct or indirect as you want with what you want done with your estate. So if you don't want it all sold off, like I don't want all my property fire sale and then my kids have a bunch of cash and then go and blow it on something, right? You can say, hey, that stays in place. We designate a different management company to manage the asset. The kids have the cash flow, right? Instead of having the actual cash from the sale of the asset, and they can live off the cash flow instead of, kind of killing the chicken that lays all the eggs, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so you can either do that through your will with a testamentary trust, or in a lot of folks do living trust. They put it together while they're alive, a trust, and then that trust controls those assets. So like, let's say you own a bunch of apartments and you have benchmarks on when you think your children should get chunks of money. That can all come in a trust, but you can't just direct that from a will, because a probate court's only part of that for a period of time, unless you tell the probate court, like, hey, I got 1,500 units, but I want to park those in a trust. You can do that trust through a probate court, or you can do it before you die, and a lot of people do it before they die.
Give me some creative stuff about like how people, like high net worth people, release funds to their kids. I've heard some cool stuff where it's like, one, we're giving all the money away and we're just going to leave $1 million to each one of the kids, right? Or whatever the kid's doing, whatever their role is, whatever their job is, whatever their occupation is, they'll match whatever their income is. So they can go and work at McDonald's if that's what their ambition level is. And instead of making $8 an hour, they'll make $16 an hour because the trust will match that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Kind of matches their level of ambition and motivates them, right?
One of the great concerns people have, that are going to pass on wealth is like, I don't want my child to know that they got this big, pot of money at some period of time, that while I'm 50 years old, I'm expected to live maybe 85, my kid's 10, in a couple of years, they'll figure out that when they're 40, they're going to have this giant lump of money. It doesn't really matter what they do now. So yeah, you can get as creative as you want with the trust, essentially, just like that. I mean, that's a great idea that people go with all the time with, hey, I want my kids to be comfortable, but I don't want them to be overly comfortable. I want them to be ambitious. And that's one creative way to do it. It's recently, it's funny because I saw Anderson Cooper's mother passed away, the Vanderbilt.
Yeah, just passed away. $200 million, right?
Yeah. So his whole life, his mother told him, like, you're not going to get a dime. And he wholly expected that. He was only interviewed some short period of time ago. And he's like, She always told me that, and that story never changed. I just expected she would give all that money away or wherever. And then he's like, and there's no way I'd be here. He's like, what super rich kid of a rich parent has ever really done much?
I mean, she was a not a Rockefeller. She was a Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt, yeah. So she got that old train money and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So he's gotten sounds like about 98% of that money. So he's gonna be doing okay. Yeah. But just under that,
he got everything. He's got two brothers. One got the penthouse apartment, and the other one didn't get anything. I think they were an estranged brother.
Yeah, and we can talk about that in a second. But that's one of the benefits of a trust is the privacy. So you don't find CNN doesn't find out that you wrote off one.
Otherwise, probate is all public, right?
Yeah, correct. And that's all they did for this case. All she had was a will. She filed that will. All you got, it's a public record, so you just ask the court for it, and you get to read it as if you're, one of the family. So
that's a big deal.
Yeah.
What happens to your wills? Well, I got a bunch of good stuff, dude. What happens to your will if she was like 95 years old or something when she passed away? What happens if she did her will when she was 65 and then did another one when she was 75 and another one when she's 85 and then another one when she's 95? And they're all kind of there. Some of them are dated, maybe not dated. Maybe it looks like they were changed or the date. Like what does that all look like? What happens in that case?
So like you mentioned, the term for the person who's working with a court is an executor. So one of their jobs is to locate the will they believe is the will that controls. A standard.
Where do you usually hold the will?
It depends. Some law firms like to keep them in their safes, in their vaults. We recommend that people keep them in their own safe so that, the family finds it. Law firms change, attorneys move, all that sort of stuff.
The family finds it and says, oh, this wasn't as much as money as I thought I was going to get. And then they just like throw it away.
Yeah. So yeah, there's no definite answer on that. There's pros and cons.
Have a couple copies with the people that you're naming as the executor, as your attorney. Have one on file in your own safe.
Yep. So the executor is going to find the one they believe presented to the court, and a standard term in any will is this extinguishes any prior will I've executed. So
got it.
Just locating those, track them down.
Right.
So I've also seen the kids get money in different stages. When they're 25, when they're 30, when they're 40, when they're 45. Or I've also seen it where the kids only get money for it was like educational purposes. So if you're going to go back, get a degree or plug into some sort of like technical school or something like that it pays for those kinds of things for generations and generations. Kind of interesting, but it's cool that you can do some creative stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. You can use your trust almost like a lender. Like if you say to your kids, like, you can use this money, but only if it's like in an entrepreneurial pursuit,
Mm-hmm.
And the trustee's charged with reviewing whether it's something, worth spending on. So yeah, there's a lot, pretty much anything you can imagine, you can get on, and that you can get on paper, you could charge a trustee with.
Interesting.
And like, just to step back for anybody who's listening and hasn't spent time reading about trusts and all that stuff, it's essentially a contract that can lay out terms of what you want to do and direct with that. So it's, it's creative. You can come up with for the contract, and then the trustees bound to follow those terms. And generally, you're pretty flexible on what you can do.
Yep.
How do if I get hit by a bus and my wife inherits all the money, how do I make sure that the pool boy doesn't get any of my money?
That's right. That's a provision that we have in your trust that says my money that passes on from me to others is going to stick with these people that I want. So you can actually have termination language in there that if your spouse's provision of money can actually be taken away if they decide to cohabitate, which means they move in with somebody else, or they marry somebody else, or they marry somebody else but they don't have a prenup. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it where you can still support that spouse, and if they, execute a prenuptial agreement with that new spouse, a lot of people, they just passed away and they planned for this. They're okay with that and they want to support that, loved one and all that, but they don't want to support the new husband or the pool boy or the new children of the new marriage or whatever.
Step kids you never met before, living off of your wife marries somebody who's got 8 kids who are all dysfunctional and drug addicts, right? And then all of a sudden they get majority of your wealth, 80% of your wealth, because I have 2 kids, right? How do you make sure that doesn't happen? You don't want that to happen.
Yeah, and that's one thing, another valuable piece of a trust. If you just have a will, 99.9% of wills say, hey, everything's going to go to my spouse. At that stage, that's all out. You have no control anymore if it's just in a will. So that's another thing to consider is, do I want, and everybody loves their spouse, right? This isn't a way to like carve out your wife or your husband or whatever, but it's just a way to ensure that your stuff is sticking with your children or, for what you want it to do.
Your legacy versus somebody else's legacy. I think it's a good way of making sure that that's the case. Tell me about the taxation when we pass away. What does that look like? Depends on the state, right?
Yeah, well, the federal is now $11.5 million or something like that, to where you don't get touched by the Fed until you're over 11.
First $11 million of property or dollars or equities or whatever is non-taxable.
Right, and Ohio doesn't.
From a federal standpoint.
Right, Ohio has no taxes.
And then Ohio has none. Are there city and local?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, so you're only looking at state and Fed. First 11 million. Does that mean you have to get everything? Like I have a bunch of properties. Does that mean I have to have all that appraised and then valued out when I pass away?
Yeah, that'd have to be a part of it.
So they might have to sell some of the property if let's say I'm not liquid enough to pay 11% of it. They might have to sell some property because of that, right?
Yeah, and there's things you can do. When you're becoming 80 years old, you can plan for some of that stuff, right? So if you're worth, 800 million 50 years from now, you'll obviously want to plan for that and start that transition, well in advance. What is it? Probably 99.5 out of 100 die of a pretty reasonable, time frame. Thankfully not that often do people get run over by buses. So, you plan for that stuff as your estate grows and your asset pool grows and stuff like that.
Yeah. And then, and some states like Florida has no state income tax, but they have a big like estate tax, right?
Yeah.
That's where Florida makes all their money.
Yeah. They see a lot of residents moving there. And yeah, for sure.
Especially older residents, right?
The state of Ohio lost a ton of money when they wiped that out. Where I live, we had some big timers who passed away just before that had transitioned. I mean, we've been living off that wealth for a significant amount of time. And then after that, when the rich people died, there was a lot of programs that got cut and stuff. So yeah, I'm sure Florida, I can't even imagine what they have down there. So
yeah, that's wild, man.
Yeah,
that's good. So that's awesome, important information from a personal side. Let's shift into the business side of things. Tell me a little bit more about when you're going into a business. How do we make sure that if something happens, if you're either disabled or death occurs to me, my business, how do we make sure that the business continues to run and that the right documents are in place to allow your team or your partners or your estate to continue running the business so that way the business, the assets don't all just crumble?
Sure. You want to talk? Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So if you're setting up the business, it's great to get an operating agreement in place that spells out the succession planning is the general term for this sort of thing. Because succession planning is somebody started, dad, mom, grandma, grandpa started the business decades ago. They're nearing retirement, although they don't want to retire. They're still hanging around. Who's taking over? What's going to happen if something happens to them? The door's just going to close up, whether slam shut or, over the next couple of years when it's not functioning that well. And so you do succession planning. Now, if you're starting the business, do that up front, you're all set. A lot of times, though, it's something you have to kind of go in there, see what documents are involved. If there's partners, you might have to re-execute and come to that agreement, or you might be able to come up with transfer on death affidavits that say, if there's partners involved, my particular fraction is going to go to the trust or to whatever particular family member.
Or get bought out or whatever.
Or I choose to,
So, yeah, there's voluntary and involuntary, removal from the LLC. Involuntary usually means that you're dead. So when that happens, like Adam said, you can actually transfer that as a non-probate transfer with a transfer on death designation. And you want to park that in something else. Maybe you have another LLC, or you have a brother, or your spouse actually wants to do it. So that's just a very quick way to move that membership interest and make sure that that continues. And, you still have the same say and all that. Like in your case, if you were to pass away, your membership interest would get transferred into your trust. So your trustee and those business advisors you have would still make sure that things are running well, that you're going to hit your value add marks and benchmarks and stuff like that. So,
yeah, I mean, for me, it's especially once you get to a certain level in business where you're not actively in the day-to-day operations,
sure. Right.
You're not as worried about it, right? And especially when you have property like I have, worst case scenario, you throw a management company in place, let them handle it, let them cash flow, dividends, all that stuff happens. What happens with I don't even know what happens with my loans, or if somebody has loans on properties, or if they have debt in certain business capacities, and then all of a sudden that person passes away. Are those loans usually called due, or what happens next?
Yeah, typically it's going to be that they're basically creditors of the estate. So they're going to have to be figured out how to be dealt with. If you have other partners on the deal, someone will hopefully have to
Refine.
So yeah, anytime you personally guarantee, you're debtor in that situation, and then the creditor can come and snag it. So that's why it's important to have these non-probate transfers, because the minute you die, that can be transferred immediately to your designee. So they can't. If you have something happen, it'll get transferred over, and they can make a play at your estate. But if you've done well, then your estate that you file your will with the probate court, there isn't much in there because you've done it well and you've transferred everything.
Interesting. Yeah, that's good. And I have mostly non-recourse loans anyway. So the only recourse is really the property. So we're lending mostly on the property. So hopefully I got to double check on that and make sure those can't be called due at the same time.
And a bank is in the business of making money, so they don't want to take your asset back. What would probably happen is there'd be some, hopefully discussion with that bank, and you could work on, refine them out or getting new guarantors on there and stuff like that. So,
mm-hmm.
And really, the business is involved, right? The entity that set up that loan or put together the deal or whatever is the entity. So it's not necessarily dying with you.
That's the title owner. Yeah.
As long as you've put into place what that company or that entity is going to do upon your passing.
Right.
I've seen it also where the partners and the owners of the company each get a life insurance policy, right? And the company pays for like a term life insurance policy for the next 20 years or longer. And if somebody passes away, essentially there's a buyout clause in the operating agreement where that person passes away, the entity gets the money from the life insurance and then uses that to buy out that person's estate. So that way, the remaining partners then own it, but they don't have to then scramble and refinance or sell any other portion of the business or try to, really scramble in order to come up with that cash. So that's a good way of doing it too, I think.
Yeah, and especially when, under your scenario where you're hopefully, treating that asset very well and it's more valuable than it was when you got a loan against it. You don't want someone to come in and snatch up what you guys have done. You lose all that value.
Right. Right. No, that's good stuff. What else do I need from a business standpoint?
We'll just talk LLCs, partnership. That's the most important thing. One, knowing who your partners are is an important piece, because that partner is probably going to remain. So, where your interest is going to go, whether it's going to go to that partner or to your spouse or whoever.
And this is not only for me, if something happens to me, right? But it's also for your business partner. If your business partner passes away, like, I don't know, do you want to be partners with your business partner's wife? Like that's not the relationship that I set up, right? I'm business partners with my business partner because of the value that they bring to the partnership. And so it's important to have this stuff clarified to make sure that you're the one who knows your business, and you don't have somebody else who's not aware of the inner workings of your company, then coming in, stepping in, and then making decisions based on limited information.
Right. Yeah. And I think, take away from today is there's a lot of stuff, like Adam said earlier, that you should talk about at the outset, because one, that's the easiest time to do it. It's the easiest time to hopefully be a little bit more focused because there's not so many distractions of the day-to-day operation of your business. But talk about like, hey, I know you're married, but let's say I take a dump, what do we want to do with mine, or vice versa? Like, what is your spouse's background, or let's make sure that our spouses don't take it over because we don't want to obligate them to deal with property management companies or, running a dry cleaner.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think these, hopefully people hear this stuff and it kind of opens their mind to be like, oh, I was about to buy something, next month in St. Louis, and I'm taking on some partner I barely know. What do we do? Maybe we should think about it for an hour.
Yeah. And so if there's no other takeaway from our rambling about boring learning stuff,
Right.
make a plan. But most of all, step one, plan on setting a date with somebody, sitting down with whomever, your trusted legal advisor. Schedule a date, because you got to get together with somebody face-to-face, phone call, whatever it is, but have a date, because what we always see is you're like, oh yeah, I need to do that. They take half a step, don't get anything knocked out, and it just is 6 months later, it's still nothing done. So schedule a date.
So that goes with your business, that goes with your personal. And and a lot of people don't know what they don't know. So it's just like, if somebody hears today, obviously, they're going to be hearing this hopefully across the country and stuff. If you have a lawyer that you like, reach out to them and be like, hey, I've never really thought about this, but I'm doing really well at owning apartment complexes or whatever. But I just now realized, I've never thought, what do I do with that interest? Or, what's going to happen to my loan? I don't even know if it's non-recourse. What does that even mean? So hopefully this opens up to be like stuff that people haven't really put their arms around.
Yeah. And it's all this stuff. And it's also, like organizing everything that's in your business too, right? It actually helps you with a lot of that stuff that, dude, you're moving, you're shaking, you got stuff going on, you're busy, you got some files and you kind of put them off to the side. Then all of a sudden paperwork starts stacking up on top of it. And then you're like, what was that account number? What was that password? What was the login? Like, what was all that stuff? And dude, what if something happens and then your family doesn't even know that account exists, right? Like putting one of those documents together that outlines all your different accounts, logins, passwords, all that sort of information, I think is one of the things that I'm doing right now too. And just, here's the lender for 123 Main Street. Here's the lender for 456 Maple Street. Like here's who to talk to. Here's the management company, just kind of organizing all that. Like we have a lot of it organized. But I'm trying to do that both on the personal side and on the business side, all in one place. So my wife can have it. I trust my business partners. I trust the executors in my state. I trust all those people, but I also want to make sure there's kind of like checks and balances in place and everybody knows, so nothing can be hidden amongst the people who I care about,
Yeah, no, and it's obviously, it'll be very important, to your partners and your executors and stuff, but like, it'll be no way it'll be even close to as important to your spouse or your children or whatever when you pass away. So just them having that peace of mind of it's like, oh, okay, I know that this is his insurance guy. I'm going to call this, guy or lady up and be like, where do I even start? And just having that phone call, can put people at ease, night and day.
Yeah. Knowing who the insurance person is. Yeah. Knowing all that stuff. So important stuff. Now here's the thing, man. You're talking about a lot of documents. You guys are attorneys. I know how attorneys think, and I know how expensive they can get. And I know how they're always looking for handouts. And no, I'm just kidding.
Asking for a lot of money.
I was surprised at how inexpensive for how important this stuff is, right? You don't have to give me like a quote, but it's usually less than $5,000 though, right? For most of this stuff.
Yep. We do so for the state of Ohio, if you're a husband and wife, we want to make sure that there's not a hesitation, or at least too much of a hesitation to get your stuff done. So like the big four that we mentioned, husband and wife, we do that for $750. So check that box. I know, most people might just have to swipe a card for that, but we want to help you get it done. And then you can be like, oh, cool, I'm a grown up. And
it's really inexpensive.
The big deal on when you have minors, you got little babies. Like we both have 3 little kids, it's like, who's going to take care of our kids when we pass away? And I don't want some probate court having to hear amongst, my siblings, or having my siblings or my parents or my in-laws or someone to have to fight about who would be the best caretaker. So I get to decide that. So that's one of the most important things we impress upon people is make sure you don't have your family bickering about who's going to be the better parent. And, are they going to share the children with, the other parents? And, so
yeah,
that's one thing.
There's enough stress over who's going to go where around the holidays on what date, right? So you can imagine if the stakes
Christmas
are raised,
is stressful, let alone somebody's dad.
Yeah, raise the stakes on that, and then dealing with that in the midst of a tragedy. So knock it out. And
and what we're asking for in that we get together, we make sure you actually know what you're signing and discuss. And we make plenty of money with that. That's fine. So.
Yep.
So
it's good stuff, man.
We got to cut that out. No, I'm just kidding. Add a zero, Tim. Can you edit or add a zero?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How long does the process take? Like, what is it? I mean, if somebody wanted to give you guys a call or call up their attorney, like, what can they expect? They call up their attorney, they hop on a phone for an hour or two.
I mean, I can't speak with other people, but what happens for us on a very simple, like, I want to make sure I get a will done. My spouse and I want to make sure we get our powers of attorney done. We want to get our living will done. It's basically like a phone call with us. We send you a, it's about, 4 or 5 page, 6 page document to fill out with very straightforward questions. You give us the name of your executor, give us the name of your guardians, pretty simple stuff, self-explanatory stuff. We usually have to talk to people once or twice about that. They send it back, we prepare the stuff, and then we can turn it around in like a week. So, and then we just have to get together to execute. So it's very simple, how it goes. And then there's some complexities in there, how do you guys want to transfer your real estate? That's some additional stuff. How do you want to protect your personal assets and things? And some people, about 9 out of 10 people, we don't think that a trust is all that necessary. But for the ones that do, we just, detail why we think it might benefit them and how we can do it and stuff like that. So very simple, but we think it's intimidating to call lawyers. We hope that you can tell that we're not, the most over the top serious guys. So we just try to make it easy for people to, feel like they can call and not be scared away.
Yep. Get it knocked out.
Although I look scary, I'm sure, in this video.
Yep.
Sit back a little bit more. You're scaring me. No, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys. How can people get a hold of you if they're interested in talking with you guys a little bit further about some of this? And you guys do obviously a whole bunch of different business things, a bunch of securities documentation together as well. But I think from a Legacy Wealth Show perspective, this is a key topic that I think is very important, that seems very intimidating for a lot of people. And I like that you guys were able to simplify it, put some bullet points and number some of the important documents and what that whole process looks like. If somebody wants to get all this stuff taken care of, how can they get a hold of you guys?
Sure. So the best way to get started is just by emailing us. I'm Paul at vincentesq.com. He's Adam at vincentesq.com. So if you
we'll put your emails in the show notes and everything too. So everybody can.
And vincentesquire.com is our website. Office number is on there. So you do that. I don't need to give my number over here. But we're focused on kind of entrepreneurs. So business ties in with your estate planning, and ties in a lot of times with our clients for real estate too. Kind of those three all kind of work together. So that's what we focus most of our time on. And we like seeing people grow, like you, take on. So.
Yep.
I appreciate you guys.
Happy to answer any questions folks have about estate planning or.
Yeah, we have relationships all over the country. So, if anybody hears and they have questions, we're happy to be your first call and we can direct you where to go.
Yep.
Awesome. Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for being on the Legacy Wealth Show. And dude, love all the info. So thank you guys and all the value you brought.
Take care.
Yeah, thanks.